What started as a noise complaint, or so they claimed, turned into something far more sinister. When a group of smug HOA board members thought they could bully a quiet, aging farmer off his own land, they figured, I'd just roll over. They thought I was too old, too out of touch, too small to fight back. What they didn't know was that I'm the one man who holds the key to their entire way of life, and I wasn't about to let them erase over a century of family blood, sweat, and soil. What followed was a fight for truth, legacy, and justice, and believe me, the ending will leave you speechless. Let us know what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. I'd love to know who's sitting around the fire with me tonight. The morning started like any other on the farm. The air was still cool when I stepped outside, the sky just starting to glow pink on the horizon. There's a kind of peace you only get before sunrise, just you, the soil, and the silence. I climbed onto my old John Deere tractor, same as I had every spring for the last 40 years, and headed out to the north field. My father taught me how to drive this very machine when I was a scrawny 12-year-old. He said, "Son, the land listens when you treat it right." And I believed him. This place, it's more than property. It's family. My great-grandfather settled here after returning from World War I. Every fence post, every row of crops, every nail in the barn carries some part of our story. We've farmed these 2,000 acres for 5 generations. And now, in my 60s, I'm still doing it, not because I have to, but because it's who I am. I remember thinking how perfect that morning was for planting. A slight breeze, no rain in the forecast, soil just dry enough to work. I was halfway through the 3rd row when my phone buzzed. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. I don't usually keep it on me when I'm working the fields, but something made me check it during lunch. 10 missed calls, most from neighbors. 3 voicemails from my cousin Tom, and 1 email from the Silver Pines Homeowners Association with the subject line, "Violation Notice." I almost dropped my sandwich. Now, let me be clear. Silver Pines is the name of a relatively new housing development that sprouted up along my eastern border. They bought land from a bankrupt cattle rancher about 2 years ago and slapped up some big homes with wraparound porches and 0 lot lines. Most of the folks that moved in seemed nice enough city, people chasing the country dream, I figured. But I always knew that putting an HOA next to a working farm was a recipe for headaches. Still, I never expected this. The letter accused me of violating their community standards by operating noisy machinery during inappropriate hours, and claimed my chicken coop set up in the same place. It's been since 1968, produced odors offensive to residents and harmful to property values. It went on to demand that I cease all farming operations within 500 feet of their property line within 48 hours or face a $200 per day fine. I read it twice, then a 3rd time. I even read it out loud, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood something. But no, it was exactly what it sounded like. An HOA telling me to stop farming on my own land. I laughed out loud right there in the middle of my kitchen. A hard, bitter kind of laugh that came from deep in my gut. They had no authority over my farm. I knew that. This wasn't some cul-de-sac with matching mailboxes and lawn restrictions. This was 2,000 acres of registered agricultural land, zoned and taxed as such for over 100 years. I crumpled the paper and tossed it into the trash. Figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. That afternoon, I tried to shake it off, focus on getting seed in the ground before the weather turned, but the whole thing ate at me. It felt like a threat not just to my operation, but to everything my family built. I kept thinking about how someone behind a desk, maybe wearing a suit, thought they could boss me around on land that had been in my family longer than the county courthouse had been standing. By dusk, I was back at the house, dusty and sore but not satisfied. Something wasn't right. Tom hadn't just called to chat. And when your cousin leaves 3 voicemails in one morning, you know something's up. I called him back while standing on the porch, watching the sun dip below the tree line. "You got that letter?" he asked immediately. "Sure did," I replied. "Can you believe the nerve of these people?" Tom sighed. "Frank, this isn't just a complaint. There's talk going around quiet meetings between the HOA board and some developers. I think they're trying to expand Silver Pines. Aggressively." I froze. My grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean, expand?" "They're eyeing your east fields. There's chatter that the HOA is working with the Planning Commission. They want to push the community boundary line and rezone." I didn't speak for a long moment. "My east fields? That's where I grow most of our corn. That's where the irrigation line starts. That land feeds half the county." "Frank?" Tom asked. "I'm here," I said slowly. "They're not taking this land, Tom. Not without a fight." He sighed again. "Just be careful. I've seen them go after people with everything they've got." I ended the call and stared out across the darkening fields. The breeze had died down. The air was still and heavy now. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never felt on this farm before: unwelcome. The next morning, I was up before the sun, sipping coffee in the kitchen while my old lab, Rusty, dozed at my feet. I hadn't slept well. That email from the HOA and Tom's warning kept bouncing around in my head all night. There was something off, something deeper than just a noise complaint. I've been around long enough to know when trouble is coming, and this had the smell of politics and power games all over it. I was halfway through my second cup when I heard a car door slam out front. Not a neighbor. Not the mailman either. I walked out onto the porch and saw a black SUV parked at the edge of my gravel drive. The vehicle looked like it hadn't seen a dirt road in its life: chrome rims, spotless paint, and tinted windows. The driver's side opened, and out stepped a tall woman in high heels and a white pantsuit, holding a clipboard. She was followed by two younger men wearing matching polos, with the Silver Pines HOA logo on their chests. I folded my arms as she walked briskly across my lawn, heels sinking slightly in the soft ground. She didn't even flinch. "Mr. Jackson," she called out, her voice all sugary charm. "I'm Veronica Chase, president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. We need to speak with you about your ongoing violations." I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her long enough to make her blink. Then I said, "There's nothing to discuss. Your HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over my land." Her smile didn't waver, but I saw her eyes narrow just a hair. "Actually," she said, flipping a page on her clipboard, "according to the county zoning board, your agricultural exemption expired last year. Your land now falls under the transitional zone shared with our community." That hit me like a slap. I knew it wasn't true. My property taxes hadn't changed a bit, and I sure as hell hadn't received any notice from the county. But she said it with such certainty, like it was a done deal. "My family has farmed this land since 1902, I said. "We've got water rights, soil reports, records going back 5 generations. No HOA has any claim to this property." Veronica clicked her pen and handed me another paper. "This is an official cease and desist notice," she said smoothly. "You're being formally ordered to discontinue all agricultural activity within 500 feet of Silver Pines property lines. Continued violations will incur daily fines." I looked down at the paper in her hand. I didn't take it. "You know this is nonsense," I said. She tilted her head slightly. "Times change, Mr. Jackson. Our residents bought their homes with certain assurances: quiet mornings, clean air. Property values matter. This is about the future." I took a slow breath, the kind you take before saying something you might regret. "You think your fancy houses matter more than feeding people? We think people deserve to live in peace," she said, still smiling. "Then maybe they shouldn't have moved next to a working farm," I replied. Her expression finally changed, just a flicker. She stepped back, turned on her heel, and nodded to the men behind her. "You've been informed. Expect further correspondence." As they walked back to the SUV, one of the younger men muttered, "Can't wait to see condos here instead of cow poop." I clenched my jaw but said nothing. No point getting in a shouting match with a kid in khakis. They drove off, tires crunching on the gravel. I stood there on the porch, long after they were gone, the paper still fluttering slightly in Veronica's wake. I didn't pick it up, not yet. My hands were shaking with anger. Later that day, I drove into town to see Sam, my lawyer. I've known him 30 years. He helped me close on a piece of acreage back in the early 2000s and helped settle Dad's estate after he passed. Sam listened while I laid it all out. Veronica, the HOA claims, the cease and desist. He frowned as he scanned the paperwork I finally picked up from the porch. "This looks official," he said, "but it's bluff. They're hoping you don't push back." "Thing is," I said, "they're talking like they already have control, like something's already been decided behind closed doors." Sam looked up. "They might be setting the stage for a reasoning proposal. If they can get the county on their side and you don't challenge it, they'll have precedent. You need to be proactive, Frank." I nodded. "That's what I'm here for." When I got home, there were orange flags planted along the east fence line, surveyor markings. They hadn't even bothered to ask. I stood there for a long time, just staring at those little neon-colored flags flapping in the breeze. My fields, my soil. I knew every inch of that ground, the way the wheat grew fastest near the creek bed, the way the soil held moisture better after the second rain. And now, someone thought they could carve it up with a clipboard and a county seal. Well, they were about to find out just how stubborn a farm boy could be. I barely slept that night. I kept waking up thinking I heard vehicles pulling up outside or men talking near the barn. Paranoia, maybe, but after Veronica and her goons strolled across my yard like they owned the place, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in motion, something I wasn't supposed to know about yet. The next morning, I was pouring feed into the chicken coop when I saw movement out near the eastern fields. At first, I thought it was deer, but when I squinted against the sun, I realized it was a group of men in business suits pacing along the edge of my corn rows. Some of them were pointing at clipboards, others taking photos. I dropped the feed bucket and stormed across the field in my boots, mud sucking at my heels. "Hey!" I shouted as I got closer. "You're on private property!" They turned, startled, but not apologetic. One of them, a tall man in a gray suit with a shiny watch and that slick city look, stepped forward. "Good morning, sir. James Miller, Westbrook Development Corporation. Just surveying the property for preliminary planning." I stared at him. "Planning for what?" He pulled out a tablet and tapped a few times. "According to our documents, Westbrook purchased 1,700 acres from Silver Pines HOA 3 weeks ago. This land is slated for the upcoming Silver Pines Marketplace retail spaces, luxury condos, and a wellness center. Construction begins next month." My stomach dropped. "That's not possible," I said, nearly choking on the words. "I never sold this land. I own every acre of it." James raised an eyebrow and turned his tablet around to show me a satellite map. Sure enough, it outlined my eastern fields, complete with a red dotted line showing Westbrook Development Zone. The name listed as the previous owner, Silver Pines Community Trust. "Must be a mistake," I said, my voice tight. "There's no way they sold it. This is my farm. Been in my family over 100 years. Then I suggest you contact your representatives at Silver Pines," he said with a shrug. "But as far as we're concerned, the sale is final." I turned and walked straight back to the house, fists clenched. The second I was inside, I pulled my old fireproof safe out from under the stairs and started digging. Deeds, plat maps, water rights, tax bills, every legal document I had about this land. Everything showed me as the sole owner. No subdivisions, no liens, no transfers. Still, my gut was screaming. I grabbed the phone and called the county recorder's office. The first need to check the current ownership status of Parcel 11A, Jackson Family Farm. I told the clerk. There was a pause. "One moment, sir." The hold music barely had time to start before she came back on the line. "According to our records," she said carefully, "approximately 1,700 acres of that property were transferred to the Silver Pines Community Trust 6 weeks ago. You retain ownership of the 300 acres surrounding your homestead. I felt like the air had been punched out of me. That's not possible, I whispered. I never signed anything. Well, the transfer documents on file do bear your signature, she said. Would you like me to email you a copy? I said yes. And 5 minutes later, the file popped up on my laptop. I opened it with shaking hands and stared at what looked like my own signature on a set of transfer documents I had never seen before in my life. The notary stamp looked legit. The paper trail was clean, but it wasn't real. I knew that. Every fiber of my being screamed that someone had forged those papers. I looked out the window. Parked at the edge of my property was that same black SUV. Veronica was inside, talking on the phone, eyes locked on my house like she was watching a show. When she saw me watching, she smiled and waved. It took everything in me not to go outside and confront her. Instead, I called Sam. We've got a problem, I said. Within the hour, he was sitting at my kitchen table, flipping through the documents. This is one of the dirtiest land grabs I've ever seen, he said. But it's slick. They've backdated filings, used digital signatures, even made it look like your grandfather sold partial development rights decades ago. That never happened, I said. I believe you, Sam replied, but proving it's another matter. I rubbed my face. So what now? Now, we investigate. We file injunctions. But Frank, you need to know this is going to take time. I didn't have time. That was the problem. The developers weren't waiting. They were already marking up my fields like they owned them. And worse, no one seemed to be stopping them. I drove into town that afternoon to speak with my cousin Tom, who also happened to serve on the local zoning commission. He met me in the parking lot behind the old hardware store, looking nervous. They've been planning this for months, he said under his breath. Secret meetings, rewriting minutes after they're approved. Veronica's got connections. She's working with the city planning director, pushing hard to expand the Silver Pines development footprint. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. Because people who speak up get crushed, Tom replied. You remember Jeff Winters? He questioned the legality of some HOA bylaws last year. Next thing you know, he had $8,000 in violation fines and had to sell his house. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about one HOA being greedy. It was organized, coordinated, strategic. That night, I barely ate. I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through documents and maps, trying to find some crack in the foundation they'd built under me. The wind outside had picked up. My weather vane squeaked with each turn. Rusty paced the floor, picking up on my unease. I stayed up until 3 a.m., combing through everything my family had kept over the years. There, buried in the bottom of a file box, was a set of original property maps dated 1942, clearly showing the unbroken boundary lines of our farm. I laid them out beside the documents from the county. The difference was obvious. The new maps showed my land sliced into parcels boundaries that never existed before. My hands trembled as I looked at the forged signature again. They had stolen my land with paper and pen, and now I had less than a month before bulldozers arrived. I didn't sleep much after finding those forged papers. My mind kept replaying the conversation with the county office, the look on Veronica's face when she waved at me from her SUV, and that sick feeling in my gut when I saw the altered maps. I knew I had to act fast before bulldozers turned generations of soil and sweat into shopping center foundations. First thing the next morning, I drove back to the county building in town. Miss S. Rivera, the clerk who'd answered my call, had known my family since I was a kid. She used to buy our eggs at the farmer's market when my mom was still running the stand. Frank, she said when she saw me walk in, I was going to call you. Something about that transfer didn't sit right with me. She led me into the back office, where she pulled up the official records on her screen. Her eyes narrowed. Here it is. Document filed 6 weeks ago. Notarized. Digital signature. But she clicked deeper into the metadata. The IP address doesn't trace back to any Jackson family email or business account. In fact, it was submitted from the Silver Pines HOA office. My jaw tightened. Can you print all of it? I need everything. She nodded. I'm making a copy for myself too. If this was fraud, they won't bury it. When I got home, I called Sam. He spent the next few hours poring over the files while I paced the kitchen, pouring cups of coffee. I didn't drink. Finally, he looked up and said, "Frank, this was a coordinated job. They backdated a sale agreement and forged your signature. But they went a step further. They're claiming your grandfather sold development rights back in the 1970s. The sale now is just the execution of those rights. That's a lie. My grandfather hated developers. I believe you. But legally, it gives them cover. They're using that old claim to justify everything. It'll be hard to prove a negative, especially when they've already sold it to third-party developers who think they bought it in good faith." I sank into the chair across from him. "So what do we do?" Sam rubbed his chin. "You've got one path. Expose them. If you can show fraud, if you can prove the HOA manipulated records or acted outside their authority, the sale could be reversed. But it's going to take time, and you don't have much of it. Time. That was the one thing I didn't have. According to the developer's schedule, construction would begin in just a few weeks. Once the ground was broken, it would be a legal mess to untangle. Later that night, I did what my father always did. When faced with something heavy, I went out to the old shed where we kept our tools, sat on the workbench, and stared at nothing. I could still smell motor oil, rust, and hay. The past lived in that shed. It didn't judge. It just waited. I thought about all the kids who'd run through my fields during school visits, the families who came out for pumpkins in the fall, the diners who bought fresh produce every week. This farm didn't just grow crops, it grew community. And someone was trying to erase all of that with signatures and survey flags. I got up and walked back to the house, passing the old wooden chest in the hallway where we stored family records. Something told me to open it. Inside were yellowed envelopes, handwritten notes, and documents I hadn't looked at in years. That's when I found it. Folded neatly behind a stack of tax receipts was a brittle, typewritten document with a faded seal. My heart skipped as I read the header, Water Rights Agreement, 1947. It detailed an arrangement between my grandfather and the county for use of the reservoir built on the northern slope of our land. I remembered the reservoir just a quiet body of water now, mostly forgotten. But back then, it had been the lifeblood for nearby farms, and later, homes. I read the clauses slowly, carefully. Priority of use. Agricultural use shall take precedence in times of scarcity. Rights are irrevocably tied to the original homestead at 300 acres. I blinked. Read it again. My heart started racing. If I still owned the homestead, if the water rights were tied to that land, then I still controlled the most valuable resource in the entire region. The HOA may have stolen the farmland with forged documents, but they overlooked the one thing they couldn't fabricate: water. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sam. I think I found our leverage. He met me the next morning, eyebrows raised, as I laid the document on the table. "This is a game changer," he said, scanning it. "If it holds up, it means you control the primary water supply for the entire Silver Pines development. They can't build a luxury shopping center if no one can flush a toilet." We both laughed, but it wasn't from humor. It was relief. "We need to verify it," Sam added. "Get the original reservoir schematics. Confirm the piping routes. If we can prove that the HOA is dependent on your water, we might not need to fight this in court." That afternoon, I drove out to see old Mr. Patterson. He used to run the county's utilities department before he retired. I found him sipping sweet tea on his porch. "Frank Jackson," he said with a grin. "Heard there's trouble brewing." I showed him the water rights document. His eyes lit up. "Your granddad was smart. The main control junction is still on your land, right next to the old red oak tree, if I remember right." He disappeared into the house and came back with a tube full of blueprints. He spread them out on the picnic table. Lines and labels snaked across the pages, showing how the system branched from my property and fed into town, including Silver Pines. I snapped photos with my phone, heart pounding. The answer had been sitting there for nearly 80 years. "What are you planning to do, Frank?" Patterson asked. I looked out at the fields. "I'm going to remind them what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you." That night, I made 3 calls, one to Sam, one to the County Water Authority, and one to a local newspaper reporter I trusted. If this was going to be a fight, I wasn't going to do it alone. And if Veronica Chase thought she could steamroll an old farmer, she was about to find out just how deep these roots went. I couldn't stop thinking about that water agreement. It wasn't just a document, it was a lifeline, a quiet, overlooked piece of history that might be the only thing standing between my family's legacy and a bulldozer. The next morning, I was up before dawn. While the rest of Silver Pine slept in their spotless cul-de-sacs, I was walking the tree line behind my barn with a flashlight in hand, searching for that old red oak tree Mr. Patterson mentioned. There it was, just like he said, gnarled and wide, with a faint orange survey marker nailed into the bark. At its base, half buried in dirt and moss, was the concrete hatch to the original water control valve. I crouched down and brushed the grime off the old metal plate. The valve was still intact, rusted but functional. It fed directly into the main pipe, running beneath my land water, that didn't just irrigate my crops, but supplied homes, sprinklers, and swimming pools all throughout Silver Pines. The entire system still ran off the logic of that 1947 agreement, and I still owned the land it sat on. That changed everything. By mid-morning, I was sitting in Sam's office, both of us looking over the copies of the reservoir plans and utility schematics. "So let's say you turn the valve," Sam said slowly, "or even restrict flow legally. You wouldn't just be making a statement. You'd be cutting off water to the entire HOA. "I wouldn't cut everything," I said. "I'd just exercise my rights. The document says in times of scarcity, agricultural use takes priority. Well, this is as scarce as it gets, especially when the land feeding thousands is being bulldozed for boutique yoga studios." Sam leaned back in his chair. "It's bold. It's legal," I countered. "And you'll need to file that officially," he added. "Redirecting water allocation, especially to that extent, requires county paperwork. You ready to go that route?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." We drove straight to the County Water Authority. The clerk, a young woman in her 30s, read through the original 1947 document 3 times. Then she looked up at me like I just handed her a live grenade. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Jackson?" she asked. "This will affect hundreds of homes." "I'm very sure," I said calmly. "I'm not shutting off their water. I'm prioritizing mine per the terms of the agreement. I'm planting new crops. That land still belongs to me, and it needs water to grow." She nodded slowly and began typing. By the next morning, the wheels were in motion. I ramped up activity on my remaining 300 acres, moving irrigation lines, prepping soil, switching to high-yield crops. I hired extra hands, most of them sons and daughters of neighbors who'd grown up playing hide and seek in my hayloft. We were going to make that land work twice as hard, because it was all we had left, and I wasn't losing another inch. I also gave a call to Julie Ramirez at the Tri-County Tribune. She'd covered rural zoning fights before and didn't pull punches. When I told her the HOA had sold 1,700 acres of farmland using forged documents and were now starting construction, she didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," she said. That evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the fields in gold, I stood at the top of my hill and watched the first bulldozer roll into my eastern field, followed by a group of developers in hard hats and designer loafers. At the center stood Veronica Chase, arms crossed, her expression smug. She raised her phone and snapped pictures like it was some grand unveiling. I walked down the hill toward the property line. "You can't do this," I called out. "This is still under investigation. We have every legal right," Veronica called back. "The documents are filed. The county approved the zoning change. Construction starts now." "You stole that land," I said. Her smile didn't budge. "And you don't have the resources to stop us." I didn't respond. I just turned around and walked back up the hill. I didn't need to argue. I'd already filed what mattered. The water authority had received my documents. The clock was ticking. The next morning, I got a dozen texts before I finished breakfast. Residents from Silver Pines were panicking. Faucets were sputtering. Shower heads had gone dry. Irrigation timers were failing. Some folks thought the utility company had made a mistake. Others blamed a broken main. But I knew better. I was sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, when my phone rang. Caller ID, Veronica Chase. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. "What did you do?" she snapped. Her voice was shrill, clipped with panic. "Nothing illegal," I said. "I exercised my rights. You can look it up in the 1947 water agreement. You're cutting off water to hundreds of people." "No," I said calmly. "I'm ensuring water reaches the farm that's fed this county for generations. You've made it clear that you don't want farmland here anymore. Fine, but that also means you don't get to ride on the back of its infrastructure." In the background, I could hear someone yelling. Then she came back on the line. "We'll sue. The HOA board is preparing an emergency motion." "Good," I said. "Bring your documents. Let's compare signatures in court." There was silence for a long beat. "Listen," she said, her tone shifting to something almost soft. "Maybe we got ahead of ourselves. Let's talk compensation." "The time for talking," I said, "was before you forged my name and sold off my family's legacy." I hung up. Later that day, a news van rolled up the drive. Julie Ramirez stepped out with a camera crew in tow. We sat in front of the barn as I laid out the maps, the signatures, the timeline. She asked tough questions. I gave straight answers. By evening, the story had hit the local news. Farmer shuts off water after HOA sells his land without consent. The online comments flooded in. People were furious, especially those who'd bought homes, thinking they were moving into a peaceful community, not realizing it was built on a stolen farm. That night, I sat outside and watched the stars blink into place. The land was quiet again. But it wasn't peace, it was the breath before a storm. They wanted to build over me, but I had roots deeper than they could ever dig. The sound of bulldozers tearing into my soil hit me like a gunshot. It was just past dawn, and I was still in my pajamas, coffee halfway to my mouth. When I heard the rumble, I stepped outside and froze on the porch. My eastern field, the same land my father taught me to plow, the one where we planted winter wheat for 40 years, was being carved apart by massive yellow machines. Their treads tore through the earth like it was nothing. Crops still green and standing were crushed under steel. I ran across the yard, waving my arms, shouting, "Stop! You can't do this! This land is under legal review." The workers ignored me. One of them even turned up his headphones. A black SUV pulled up near the construction site, and out stepped Veronica Chase. Same expensive sunglasses, same smug grin. She wore heels, again like she wanted to make a point that she didn't need to care where she was standing. The heels sank into the soil, but she didn't seem to notice. "Progress waits for no one," she said, snapping photos of the scene like she was documenting a victory. "You're destroying food," I snapped. "This land feeds people," she laughed. "Not anymore. Now it feeds investment portfolios. Silver Pines Villas will be the most exclusive address in the county. 30 homes, each starting at 7 figures. I clenched my fists. "You think money replaces meaning? This land grew families, not just food. We already filed the zoning change," she said, flashing her phone like a badge. "Everything was approved. Your complaints don't matter now." As she turned to leave, she deliberately splashed mud onto my boots with her tires. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. That evening, I got a call from Emma Harper, one of the few original residents in the Silver Pines development who hadn't drunk the HOA Kool-Aid. "Have you seen what they're posting online?" she asked. I hadn't. I opened the HOA's Facebook page. The first photo showed Veronica and Richard, the HOA treasurer, standing in front of the bulldozers. "Champagne flutes, raised in victory." The caption read, "Expanding Silver Pines, out with the outdated, in with the extraordinary." The comments exploded. Some people congratulated them. but most were furious. Dozens of locals chimed in, furious about the destruction of the farmland they relied on. Farmers, restaurant owners, families who'd bought eggs and tomatoes from my stand for decades. They all knew what was being lost. At least the community hadn't forgotten, but anger wasn't enough to stop progress. Not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the kitchen, flipping through every legal document I'd ever stored. Birth certificates, tax forms, grain yield logs from 1959, anything that might help. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just knew there had to be more. Around 3 in the morning, I found it. Buried in an old envelope beneath a stack of handwritten ledger sheets was a water rights agreement from 1922, older than the one Sam had filed with the county. It wasn't just about usage, it defined control. The 1922 agreement clearly stated that the Jackson family retained sole authority over flow direction and water allocation to the entire lower valley, including emergency override provisions in the event of resource conflict. My breath caught. This wasn't just a clause, it was a lever. First thing after sunrise, I called Sarah Franklin, a friend from college, who'd gone on to become one of the most respected water rights attorneys in the state. We hadn't spoken in over a decade, but I knew she was the kind of lawyer who read the fine print when everyone else just skimmed. I scanned and emailed her the document. 20 minutes later, she called back. "They didn't read this," she said immediately. They had no idea. "Frank, you don't just have priority rights. You control the entire valley's water infrastructure under this. And it's enforceable? It's ironclad," she said. "Unless the HOA bought your house and moved the main valve, they can't touch the water. And if you file this officially, they can't override it without a full county hearing and a 2/3 community vote, which, after what you've exposed, they're never getting." By noon, I was back at the County Water Authority with the 1922 agreement in hand. The same clerk as before gave me a long look as she scanned the pages. "This will shut off water to hundreds of homes," she said again. I nodded. "And their HOA should have thought about that before they stole the farm that controls it." She processed the paperwork. I signed the orders. By the next morning, chaos hit Silver Pines like a sledgehammer. Water pressure dropped to a trickle, then stopped altogether. Showers ran dry. Toilets wouldn't flush. Lawns started turning brown by mid-afternoon. People started calling each other in a panic. Local plumbers were overwhelmed. Nobody had answers until the HOA sent out a mass email blaming temporary utility issues. That was a lie. I sat on the porch and sipped sweet tea while my phone exploded with voicemails. 17 missed calls from Veronica, 5 from Richard, even 2 from board members I'd never spoken to. I ignored every one until Veronica called again, and I picked up. "Frank, this has gone too far," she barked. "No," I said, calmly buttering a biscuit. "Too far was you forging my name and selling off my land. People need water, damn it. People need food, too. Which, if I remember right, is exactly what you bulldozed." Her tone shifted, syrupy and desperate. "Okay, maybe we got ahead of ourselves. Maybe we can negotiate compensation, something fair." I chuckled. "You bulldozed my legacy. You turned crops into concrete. And now you want to talk? We can fix this," she insisted. "Let's meet." "I'm not interested in compensation," I said. "I want my land back." There was a pause, a heavy one. "That's impossible," she said. "The contracts are signed. Then I guess we have nothing to talk about." "Wait," she cried, panic rising. "The developers, maybe they'll reconsider if there's a water issue. I can arrange a meeting." I let her sweat for a second before replying. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, at my kitchen table. Bring the developers, your lawyer, and every fake document you used to take my land." Then I hung up. That night, Silver Pines was dark and restless. Porch lights flicked on and off. People were up late, wondering why their expensive faucets had gone dry. I could almost hear the whispers, the confusion, the blame. And for once, it wasn't on me. I stood by the window, and looked out over the fields, watching the stars shimmer above the empty eastern acreage. They'd tried to erase my story, but they forgot one thing: you can't erase roots. 3 days without water, and the HOA board was falling apart at the seams. I didn't need to read the news to know it. You could hear it in the endless voicemails, see it in the headlines, and feel it in the panicked energy of a community unraveling. Families with young kids were checking into motels just to take showers. Elderly folks were calling relatives in other counties to come stay with them. And Veronica? She was running out of excuses. The story had caught fire online. HOA accused of land theft now faces water crisis. Channel 5 picked it up. National outlets were calling. Everyone wanted a soundbite from the stubborn old farmer who turned off the tap. But I wasn't in this for attention. I wanted my land back. And I wanted the truth out in the open, where it couldn't be twisted into another glossy HOA newsletter. The county judge Martinez had fast-tracked the hearing, citing urgent public interest. I guess when half a development can't flush their toilets, things tend to move quicker. The courthouse was packed that morning. On one side of the aisle sat the HOA board in polished shoes and dry, clean suits. Veronica was at the center, makeup flawless, expression unreadable. Richard, the treasurer, looked like he hadn't slept in days. On the other side were my people, farmers in ball caps and work boots, local restaurant owners, even the lady who ran the feed store. People who knew what this land had meant for generations. "All rise," the bailiff said. We stood as Judge Martinez entered, robe flowing, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Let's get to the point," he said, wasting no time. "We're here to review property claims, water rights, and potential fraudulent transfers involving Jackson Farm and Silver Pines HOA. My attorney, Maria Rodriguez, stood with the confidence of someone who'd been waiting years to deliver a knockout punch. "Your Honor, this land has been continuously owned and farmed by the Jackson family since 1892, she began, handing over aerial photos from 5 different decades. These are satellite images showing cultivation across the entire 2,000-acre property, including the disputed 1,700 acres. We also submit the original land grant from 1892. Veronica's attorney shot up. "Objection. Ancient documents aren't relevant. The property was sold legally last month with county approval." Martinez didn't even blink. "I'll decide what's relevant." "Sit down." Maria nodded and continued. "Your Honor, we've reviewed the HOA's sale documents. They are filled with inconsistencies. The signatures do not match previous filings from Mr. Jackson. Dates are misaligned. And we've brought in 3 forensic analysts to examine them." She handed the judge a thick folder. All 3 concluded that the signature on the transfer is forged, and the documents show signs of digital manipulation, specifically the property boundary edits. The judge's brows raised slightly as he flipped through the pages. "Additionally," Maria continued, "the HOA's claim that development rights were sold in the 1970s is unsupported. We found no such document recorded with the county, and no living Jackson family member recalls any such transaction." There was a murmur across the courtroom. I glanced at Veronica. Her jaw was clenched tight. She wasn't used to being on defense. "Let's also talk about water," Maria said. "Mr. Jackson still legally owns the original homestead and, crucially, the main water control valve. Based on the 1922 and 1947 agreements, both legally binding, he retains priority water allocation rights and full flow control." She gestured to a large map being placed on an easel by her assistant. It showed the water system, from the reservoir through the farmland and down into Silver Pines. "This isn't about vengeance," Maria said. "It's about what's legal and what's just." Veronica's lawyer stood up. "We have our own documentation proving the HOA acted within its authority." "Then please share," the judge said. They submitted a sleek, stapled packet. It looked professional, too professional, like it was designed more for appearances than substance. As Judge Martinez flipped through it, Maria leaned in and whispered something to her assistant. The woman rolled in a cart with 5 boxes stacked neatly, each labeled with dates. "These are the HOA's internal records," Maria said. "We subpoenaed their bank statements. What we found was alarming." She opened one box and pulled out a binder. Within 48 hours of the sale, 5 board members received identical deposits into their personal accounts. Each deposit equaled exactly 2% of the land sale price, divided evenly. The room erupted. People gasped, whispered, shifted in their seats. Judge Martinez banged his gavel. "Order! I will have order." I watched Veronica out of the corner of my eye. Her face had gone pale. Richard, beside her, started wiping sweat off his forehead with a trembling hand. "That is bribery," Maria said. "That is theft. That is collusion. And it is criminal." Veronica's lawyer stood abruptly. "We request a recess to prepare a formal response to these new allegations." "Request granted," the judge said. 30 minutes. The courtroom emptied into the hallway, but I stayed seated, staring straight ahead. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. I'd waited months for this. Tom Baker, my cousin and friend, slid into the seat next to me. "You're winning," he whispered. "Half the HOA board looks like they want to throw her under the bus." In the hallway, I overheard Veronica and Richard arguing near a vending machine. "You said this was airtight," Richard hissed. "How was I supposed to know he had water rights from the Roosevelt era?" She snapped back. "You forged documents, Veronica. We're about to be investigated by the state." I pretended to check my phone while listening. Their panic was fuel. They were unraveling. Back in the courtroom, Veronica's lawyer asked to approach the bench. He spoke quietly with the judge and Maria. After a moment, Judge Martinez leaned forward and addressed the room. "Based on the evidence presented, I am issuing an immediate injunction halting all development on the disputed 1,700 acres. No further construction may proceed until ownership is definitively resolved." I exhaled, long and slow. It wasn't the final win, but it was something. A barrier between my land and their bulldozers. Furthermore, the judge added, "I am ordering a full investigation into the HOA's records. If evidence of fraud is confirmed, this case will be referred to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." That did it. Veronica visibly sagged in her chair like someone had let the air out of her. As people began to exit the courtroom, Miss S. Jensen, an elderly woman from Silver Pines, walked up to me. Her hands were shaking slightly. "I had no idea they were doing this," she said quietly. "We were told this was approved, that you'd agreed." I nodded. "I know, a lot of folks were lied to. This isn't about punishing the residents. It's about stopping the people who thought they could lie and get away with it." Outside the courthouse, a reporter approached me with a microphone. "Mr. Jackson, do you have any comment on today's hearing?" I looked into the camera and said, "They tried to steal something that didn't belong to them. Not just land, but history, family, community. And I'm here to make sure they don't get away with it." As I turned to leave, I saw Veronica standing off to the side, flanked by her lawyer, watching me. Her eyes were full of fury, but there was something else there now. Fear. I thought the courtroom would be the climax, the peak of the storm. But the real collapse didn't start until the day after the hearing. The morning news ran my story on the front page. They plastered my face next to Veronica's, side by side under the headline, "Farmer exposes HOA fraud, development halted." That was all it took. The floodgates opened. Reporters camped outside the gates of Silver Pines. The HOA's social media pages were bombarded with furious comments. People demanded answers, apologies, and resignations. By noon, Richard, the treasurer, who'd been sweating through his suit in court, went live on Facebook. I sat on the couch with a glass of iced tea, watching as he tried to explain away the money in his account. But before he could finish, he broke down, right there on camera. "They told us no one would care," he sobbed. "They said it was just old farmland. They promised it was legal." He kept rambling, talking about secret meetings, gifts from developers, envelopes full of cash passed during HOA retreats. It was better than anything I could have said under oath. The whole county watched. as he unraveled the lie. That same afternoon, I got a knock on my door. It was the new CEO of Westbrook Development. Young, sharply dressed, nervous as hell. Her name was Lauren. "We need to talk," she said, holding a notebook tight against her chest. I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table where I'd shared coffee with Sam and old records with Sarah. I didn't offer cookies. Not yet. "First off," she said, "I want to apologize. I just took over after our previous CEO was forced to resign. This situation, it never should have happened." I studied her face. "And yet, here we are. I've read every file. It's clear the HOA acted far beyond their authority. We didn't know the land was stolen. We're filing a claim against the HOA board for misrepresentation." I nodded, slowly. "And the bulldozers?" She hesitated. "We've halted everything, completely. But I'd like to propose something different." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Instead of condos and commercial outlets, they wanted to lease a small corner, 50 acres legally this time. The proposal? A modern agricultural facility that would process and package produce from farms across the region, including mine. A partnership. Jobs for the community. And, alongside it, an educational center to teach kids where their food really comes from. "No HOA oversight," she added quickly. "None. You'd keep your autonomy." I didn't answer right away, but something about it felt right. After all the lies, this at least was honest. Later that week, Silver Pines held an emergency HOA meeting. This one looked nothing like the others. Tom Baker, my cousin, had just been elected as the new president after Veronica and half the board resigned in disgrace. The meeting was packed with residents, some angry, some embarrassed, some just confused. Tom stood at the front and said it plainly. "Most of us moved here because we love the country. We wanted fresh air, open skies. We didn't move here to destroy the community that already existed." That earned him a round of applause. The remaining board members voted unanimously to approve the farming partnership and create a permanent buffer zone between my property and the development. They also passed a bylaw amendment. No future HOA action could interfere with agricultural operations or try to annex private land. It was the first smart thing they'd done in months. As for Veronica, well, the consequences hit her fast. Criminal charges were filed within a week of the court hearing. Bank records traced the payments, and her signature was on more than one forged document. Then came the lawsuits, first from Westbrook, then from residents, then from her own husband, who filed for divorce and sold the house out from under her. She tried to keep up appearances for a while, still wore designer sunglasses to court, still smiled for the cameras. But eventually, even the press lost interest. I heard she moved into a condo 2 towns over. Every now and then, I see her car drive past my property, slowing just a little before speeding up again. I don't wave. Instead, I walk the land, my land. All 2,000 acres were returned to me after the judge voided the fraudulent sale. The paperwork was official. The fields were mine again. And as the months rolled on, I put them back to work. We replanted. We rebuilt. The bulldozer tracks were erased by wheat rows and wildflowers. Locals brought casseroles and seed packets. Farmers volunteered their time and machinery to help with the restoration. Even some residents from Silver Pines came out to help quietly at first, like they weren't sure if they'd be welcome. But they came. One older gentleman, Mr. Daly, stood next to me one afternoon, looking out across the fields. "My grandfather was a farmer," he said. "He'd be rolling in his grave if he saw what they tried to do to you." I clapped him on the back. "Well, we're rolling it all right, just not the way they planned." By the time fall came around, something incredible had happened. The line between the development and the farmland began to fade. Not physically, there were still fences and property lines, but emotionally. We set up a weekly farmers market right on the edge of the property, in an open lot the HOA used to call undeveloped community space. Now, every Saturday, families from both sides came to shop, talk, and reconnect. Some signed up for crop shares, paying up front for a season's worth of produce. Others just came for the pies and the pickled okra. Even the water issue was resolved, fairly and legally. Sarah helped draft a new agreement. Agricultural needs would still have priority, but a reserve system would ensure residents never went without essential access. It was a compromise, but one I could live with because this time it was made with honesty and respect. A year after the court ruling, we hosted a harvest festival. Kids from Silver Pines and my farm chased each other through a corn maze. Parents drank cider and shared stories. My oldest son taught a teenager how to drive our smallest tractor, both of them laughing as they bounced over the soft dirt. Tom leaned over to me. "You ever think about what would have happened if they'd gotten away with it?" "All the time," I said. "But I think about something else more." "What's that?" "That maybe they thought they could destroy a farm," I said. "But what they really did was bring a community together." When spring came around again, I stood in my eastern field and took in the quiet. Not silence, there were birds chirping, wind rustling through the early stalks, but that kind of peaceful quiet you only find on land that's healing. The bulldozers were long gone. In their place stood newly planted rows of corn, beans, and squash, breaking through the earth like nothing had ever happened. But a lot had happened. A year ago, this field was at the center of a storm I didn't ask for, a battle I had to fight, not just for myself, but for the generations before me who built this farm, and for the people who relied on it, whether they knew it or not. Now the scars were fading slowly, and something better was starting to grow. The new processing facility opened in late March. It sat on the southwest corner of my property, a clean, modern building with skylights and open-air loading bays. Westbrook kept their promise: no HOA control, no red tape. The facility was run by local folks, former farmhands, restaurant workers, even a few Silver Pines residents who'd switched careers after everything went down. It became a hub for small farmers in the region, a place to wash, pack, and distribute produce to grocery stores, markets, and schools. It created jobs, but more importantly, it created connection. People started seeing food not just as something they bought, but something grown with effort, care, and patience. One day, while we were inspecting the new sorting equipment, Lauren from Westbrook handed me a brochure mock-up. It showed school kids touring the facility, hands in the soil, picking tomatoes off the vine. At the top, in big bold letters, "Know your food, know your farmers." "We want to partner with the local school district," she said. "Field trips, workshops, maybe even a summer program. Let kids see where real food comes from." I stared at the picture a long time. "My grandfather would have loved this," I said. And I meant it. Not everything had been smoothed over, of course. There were still bitter feelings floating around Silver Pines. A few homeowners still blamed me for the water shutoff, even though the truth had been plastered all over every paper and TV station in the county. But most people had come around, especially the ones who started showing up at the Saturday farmers market. It had started small, just a few folding tables near the fence line with squash, eggs, and homemade jam, but word got out. Soon we had trucks lined up at 7 a.m., kids selling lemonade, and a bluegrass band playing on a makeshift stage made from pallets and hay bales. It felt like something out of a different era, something honest. One morning, I noticed a couple from Silver Pines walking hand in hand through the market, holding a box of vegetables. They looked over at me and waved. The man, Mr. Daly, had been one of the loudest voices against me in the early days, but now he smiled. "Those Cherokee tomatoes are incredible," he said. "Didn't realize what I'd been missing all these years." "Glad you're enjoying them," I said. People were starting to get it. The new HOA leadership, under Tom's guidance, kept their heads down and focused on repairing trust. They held open meetings. They apologized publicly. They even posted the HOA budget online, something that had never happened under Veronica. Slowly, the culture changed, not just in tone, but in spirit. Then there was the community project. A few families from the development asked if they could help start a shared garden in the space between our properties. They didn't want to take anything, just plant a few rows of herbs and flowers where the bulldozers had left open space. At first, I was cautious, but when they came out with shovels, seeds, and genuine smiles, I couldn't say no. That garden became something special. On Sunday mornings, you'd see retired couples tending lavender bushes, teenagers watering tomato vines, little kids drawing in chalk on the nearby sidewalk. People brought benches and hung fairy lights in the trees. It wasn't just about growing things, it was about being part of something real. We even held a storytelling night one Saturday, right there under the stars. I told a few tales about my father, about the year the crops froze in May, about the time a wild turkey broke through our kitchen window. People laughed, some cried, and when I looked around, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Even the water issue had found a balance. After Sarah helped draft the new agreement, we installed a monitoring system and a backup tank system for emergency drought conditions. It wasn't cheap, but it worked. We had enough water for the farm and the community. And this time, everyone knew where it came from and why it mattered. Late one evening, I was walking the field with Rusty, my old Labrador, now more gray than gold. We reached the ridge where the eastern field slopes down toward the road, and I saw headlights in the distance. A car slowed near the edge of the property. Veronica's car, same black SUV. She didn't stop, just paused, stared for a moment, then drove on. I stood there in the dark, wind tugging at my coat, and thought about everything we'd gone through: the fight, the anger, the lies, and the things we'd built in the ashes of it. Sometimes I still feel the weight of it all, especially when I walk past the part of the field that had been flattened and left bare during those first few weeks of bulldozing. The land remembers, but so do I. That patch is full of sunflowers now, bright and tall, a reminder that even broken ground can bloom again. One year after the court decision, we held a harvest festival. It wasn't anything fancy, no politicians or press, no stages or speeches. Just families, food, and the kind of laughter that only happens when people feel safe and full and free. We strung up lights across the big oak trees near the barn, set up hay bales for seating, and let the kids go wild in the corn maze we carved out by hand. It felt like a full circle. There were pies made from apples grown right here on the farm, cornbread from scratch, jars of pickles and jam, rows of pumpkins for the kids to paint. Families from both sides of the fence, long-time locals, and Silver Pines residents mingled like they'd known each other for decades. And in a way, maybe they had. They just didn't know it yet. Tom stood beside me, arms crossed, watching the crowd. He wore the same old jacket he always had, fraying at the elbows, stained from years of council meetings and fence mending. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. I looked out at the patch of land where the bulldozers had once parked. Now it was covered in raised garden beds, sunflowers, and little wooden signs with kids' names on them. Laughter echoed from the cider station. Someone's dog barked. A teenager played acoustic guitar near the fire pit while toddlers danced in boots 2 sizes too big. "No," I said, "not like this, but I'm glad we did." The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of smoked meat and fresh earth. In that moment, the weight I'd been carrying all year, grief, fury, fear, lifted just a little. I felt it drift into the trees. Veronica hadn't been seen publicly in months. Last I heard, she was still dealing with court proceedings and had moved into a small condo on the edge of town. Her name was a cautionary tale now, not just about power or greed, but about what happens when you forget the people behind the paperwork. I wasn't angry at her anymore. Not really. Anger is a fire you need it to burn bright when you're fighting for something, but if you let it keep smoldering, it just burns you up from the inside. What I felt now wasn't forgiveness. Exactly. It was something simpler. I just didn't think about her much anymore. Instead, I thought about the kids learning to plant carrots in the community garden. I thought about the single mom from Silver Pines who brought over homemade banana bread every Friday just because. I thought about the father who stood up during one of the last HOA meetings and said, I moved here for peace and quiet, not to trample someone else's roots. That line stuck with me. Not to trample someone else's roots. Because that's what it all came down to, in the end, roots. Not just the kind that feed crops, but the kind that hold people to a place. The kind that stretch deeper than zoning maps and HOA declarations. The kind that anchor generations to land and memories and truth. That night, after the festival wound down and the stars came out, I sat on the porch with my wife. She leaned her head against my shoulder, her hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa. "I can't believe we made it," she said softly. I nodded. "They tried to bury us," she smiled. "Didn't realize we were seeds." We both laughed, tired and content. Inside, our grandkids were asleep on the living room floor, curled up in sleeping bags under an old quilt. My grandmother made back in '58. The air smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke, the kind of scent you never want to lose. I thought back to the beginning. That morning I got the first violation letter. The arrogant way Veronica had strutted across my yard. The helpless rage I'd felt staring at fake documents with my name on them. The way the bulldozers had ripped through my fields like none of it mattered. And I thought about the moment I found the water rights agreement. The way my heart pounded when I realized I still had something they couldn't steal. I never wanted to fight anyone. I didn't wake up looking for a war. I just wanted to plant my fields, raise my family, and leave the land better than I found it. But when they came for what wasn't theirs, when they tried to erase more than 100 years of history with one fake signature, I had no choice. I fought back. And I won. But more than that, I rebuilt. The farm is stronger now. The community is closer. The line between us and them has faded into something better, something shared. Every now and then, a developer calls and offers to buy a piece of the property. They talk about potential, location, return on investment. I let them finish, and then I say the same thing every time. This land already has everything it needs. Because it does. It has people who care, soil that remembers, water that flows the way it was always meant to. And most of all, it has a story, one that nearly got buried, but came back stronger, louder, and more alive than ever. So if you ever drive past this place and see a sign that says Jackson Family Farm, know that it's more than a name. It's a promise to grow things that matter, to protect what's worth saving, and to never let anyone take from you what you were born to defend. I've lived long enough to know that some things in life can't be measured by money like land, memories, and a family's honor. When they tried to steal my farm with forged documents, it wasn't just about property, it was about erasing a legacy. But in that crisis, I found strength I didn't know I still had, and a community that remembered how to come together. The lesson I've learned? Never underestimate roots, whether they belong to the land, to history, or to people. What truly sustains us isn't shiny or new. It's the values we pass down, honesty, resilience, and the ties that bind neighbor to neighbor. At my age, I have nothing left to prove, but I'll always stand up for what's right, not just for myself, but for the next generation. Because some things, if we don't protect them, will disappear forever. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone you care about. You never know, you might be holding on to something worth fighting for too.